So I record this the day before Memorial Day, and so I wanted to choose a topic that was relevant to that holiday, but also LGBTQIA plus Pride Month this June. So I figured I'd look at the military history of gays in the West and also in the United States. I would also like to mention, and I've mentioned this in other videos, that I never served in the military. So I have no firsthand account of anything like that. I am also not gay, so I don't really have any kind of personal agenda with that respects. Now, there is a philosophical question about whether having homosexuals serve is a benefit or some sort of detriment. Those who view it as a benefit argue that the men will fight together harder. Not only are they fighting for a cause or a country or their king or whatever, but they are also fighting for each other. And this is probably best shown with the Sacred Band of Thebes. And it was comprised entirely of homosexual men. Those who are opposed to homosexuals in the military tend to be much more Christian. And the reason homosexuality is prohibited in the Bible, in my view, is from Jewish nationalism during times of warfare against the Greeks and the Romans. Now, I'm not a Christian. I don't think that homosexuality is evil or sinful or anything like that. I do not approve of the child grooming that occurs on the left, but that is not indicative of homosexuality in and of itself. I also believe that open tolerance of homosexuality is a cultural aspect that is particular to the West. I don't know everything about the world. I don't know, all the languages of the world. So I could be wrong about that. But it seems to me that homosexuality within the West is just a part of our culture. Regardless of your religious affiliations, you cannot deny the cultural and historical impact that Christianity has had on not only the West, but the United States. The Jewish people are first acknowledged historically around the reign of King David, which is in about the 10th century BC. And so this would be during the First Temple period, which is when King Solomon built the first temple at Jerusalem. This temple would be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar II during the Babylonian conquest of Israel. After this conquest, he would capture the Jews and send them to Babylon to be slaves, and this is known as the Babylonian captivity. The Jews were freed from their captivity after Babylon fell to the Persian king Cyrus the Great. It is after this conquest in which Cyrus the Great would free the Jews and allow them to return back to Israel, where they would rebuild the Temple of Solomon, thus beginning the Second Temple period. Israel would thus become a satrap of the Achaemenid Empire, and Cyrus is spoken very highly of in the Bible. He is the only Gentile who is allowed to get into heaven. And so this would result in a political alliance between the Jews and the Persians. And it is here where I think we can see the issue of homophobia come up, because the Persians, of course, would come into conflict with the Greeks. After the Greco-Persian Wars, you see the rise of Alexander to the throne of Macedon, and he would invade the remnants of the Achaemenid Empire, including Israel. Alexander is one of the most brilliant military strategists and commanders in human history. However, his conquests within the Levant were pretty brutal. Mass executions of fighting age males and the enslavement of women did not exactly get him a good reputation amongst the Jews. And while he was better welcomed in Egypt and especially Babylon, again, it must be pointed out that these are the traditional enemies of the Jewish people. Alexander the Great was a bisexual, and he had a lover named Hephaestion. After the death of Alexander, which happened a few months after the death of Hephaestion, we get the Wars of the Diadochi, where his empire would be carved up by his generals. And the largest of these is known as the Seleucid Empire. And it is that empire of which Judea would fall under the control of. And this would begin a process of Hellenization. Now, this process of Hellenization was not welcomed by all the Jews, and so we get what's known as the Maccabean Revolt. When we look at Greek culture, we see an open acceptance of homosexuality. In the gymnasium, people would exercise naked. Homosexual relationships were encouraged. I mentioned previously the Sacred Band of Thebes. This process of Hellenization would have definitely included homosexual culture. And so I think that's why there is such a biblical emphasis on that, because it was just a means of fighting the Greeks. Now, the Maccabean Revolt would not overthrow the Seleucid Empire. It does, however, mark the end of the Old Testament. And so this is where, obviously, the New Testament comes in. And the New Testament is about the Roman occupation of Judea. And the birth of Jesus is recorded in the census of Quirinius. And it is that census that would actually lead to a revolt by Judas of Galilee. Now, in addition to the census, there would also be what's known as the Caligula crisis, where Caligula tried to build a statue of himself within the Second Temple of Solomon, and this pissed off the Jews. The Caligula crisis would eventually lead up to what's known as the First Jewish-Roman War, and it would be Titus who would end the First Jewish Civil War by burning down the Second Temple of Solomon, thus ending the Second Temple period. Now again, regardless of your religious affiliations, you cannot deny the importance of Christianity into the West. And just because we're speaking on matters of nationalism, it must be noted that Christianity is foreign to Europe. However, I don't want to digress too much on that, so I want to return back to the 2nd century, in particular the Second Jewish-Roman War, also known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Now, interestingly enough, the emperor during the Second Jewish-Roman War was Hadrian Caesar, and Hadrian Caesar is flat out gay. So Hadrian Caesar was trying to create a pan-Hellenistic world, and the revolt of Simon Bar Kokhba was endangering that. And so it is actually Hadrian who goes in, brutally represses the revolt, and expels the Jews from the Holy Land. Which finally brings me up to the United States. But it is in the 1950s, at least to my knowledge, where homosexuals in the military sort of come to the forefront. The Crittenden Report of 1957, which is in response to a statement by Democratic Senator Clyde Hoey that homosexuality is a direct threat to all levels of governance and military. However, in the 1950s, you do see an outing of homosexuals from government jobs. This is known as the Lavender Scare. It was believed that communists could infiltrate the government and blackmail certain politicians who were homosexual. And so, in order to avoid being compromised, Eisenhower fired a lot of gay federal workers from their positions. Now, this brings me to probably the most well-known legislation regarding homosexuals and military servants. Don't ask, don't tell. What led to that was there was a serviceman by the name of Alan Schindler Jr. who was murdered. He was beaten to death by his fellow soldiers, and the president at the time, Bill Clinton, gave the executive order known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which simply says that you won't ask if someone is gay and you won't tell someone if you're gay. It doesn't sit well with me that, anyone is murdered, but especially a serviceman. And then the response is, well, he shouldn't have told anybody. And then, of course, me as a Trump supporter, I want to know why the Democrats like Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, who was a part of that administration, are now all of a sudden the, liberators of the gay community, when it seems to me that the only time they ever care about gay rights or anything regarding that is when a 9-year-old is involved. Then they're all about, openness for homosexuality. But when it is a 20-something-year-old service member who is brutally murdered, well, he shouldn't have told anybody he was gay. And that kind of brings us to where we are today. I do feel as though being homosexual should not exclude you from the military. Where I draw the line, however, is this pussification of the military. Things like the Two Mommies ad. I don't see, again, as I said, I don't see homosexuality as being inherently indicative of these ridiculous leftist policies like child grooming and the pussification of society. Now, again, I have not served in the military, but I do not see why homosexuality would be an inherent detriment. I mean, if someone thinks differently, if someone out there has served, please put that in the comments. I would love to hear it. I just don't feel that way. But that is my video. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe. All the historical topics I talked about, I didn't go into depth about. I wanted to keep it as short and as brief as I could. Yeah, and I really do want to do something for Memorial Day and LGBTQIA plus Pride Month, and I didn't want to make the standard conservative video about Dylan Mulvaney and child groomers. So hopefully I did the topic justice. Again, this country is built upon compromise, so I would really like to see, that issue compromised on. Again, just keep it away from the fucking kids. That's not too much to ask. But that is it. So hopefully you liked it. Thank you for watching.